Hello, I'm Andrew Ferguson from Kensington Wine Market, and I'm going to be leading you on a tasting of the Berry Brothers and Rudd Dailuaine 2010 Kensington Wine Market cask. This is a Santo finished single cask, which is a first for us. It's also our first Dailuaine as a business to bottle a single cask, which is kind of cool. I'm going to pour myself a little dram here, which we'll get to in a minute. But before we do, better that we perhaps talk a little bit about the brand, which is Berry Brothers and Rudd, and the distillery, which is Dailuaine. So Berry Brothers and Rudd, established in 1698 at number 3 St. James Street in London, originally coffee merchants to the Queen. They are now a world famous wine merchant, but they've also had their hands in the whiskey industry. They founded the Cutty Sark blend. For about 30 years, they ran the Glenrothes single malt brand. They never owned the distillery or the whiskey, but they owned the rights to promote and sell Glenrothes. They've also had their own independent bottlings for quite some time now. We've been working with them for probably 17 or 18 years. It's been a great relationship and one that I certainly treasure and appreciate. Dailuaine is a single malt we don't see very often, despite the fact it's a reasonably large distillery, originally founded in 1851. The distillery is owned by Diageo today. Most of the production, almost all of it in fact, goes into blends. It's an unusual distillery. The way it's set up, you'd think it would create a lighter, very fruity style of spirit, but they have unusual condensers. There's actually stainless steel condensers with a very reduced copper contact in them. And they do this intentionally to create a bit of a more meaty, sulfury style of spirit. Now, a number of distilleries will try to do the same thing through the use of what are called warm tubs, which are these big kind of bathtubs that you have a large coil in. And the idea is that you're going to cool the spirit quickly and with as little copper contact as possible. Your classic shell and tube condensers, by comparison, are going to maximize that copper contact and really increase the purification of the spirit before it goes into casks. So Dailuaine, typically very meaty, slightly on the sulfury side. Those spirits tend to work well with sherry casks. Now, that could be why this particular whiskey worked for us. This is the first time we've ever bottled, as I mentioned before, a Dailuaine single cask, so that's kind of cool. But the even cooler thing about this is that this is a Santo cask, which is a type of Italian dessert wine, also known as holy wine. It's from the Tuscany region. And it's kind of an interesting, it's not as sweet as, say, an ice wine, and I find the flavors are a little deeper and richer in it as well, too. But as many of you will know, especially if you follow us at Kensington Wine Market, we're wine cask skeptics. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't find whiskeys we like matured in wine casks. We do, but I think those casks have to be treated properly. So one of our favorites is the STR cask, shaved, toasted, and recharred, where you take a wine cask and then you rechar it and basically kind of change the seasoning process. Maybe if you're going to rinse the cask or you're going to fill it from wet, but you're going to empty all the wine out. What we do find a lot of times, and if you notice that a whiskey's got a pink hue to it, it's been in a wine cask, sometimes some producers are leaving the wine in there and that wine is actually flavoring the whiskey. I don't think they're supposed to do that. In a perfect world, they shouldn't. But when you come across those casks, I find that they've got sometimes some really off-putting notes to them. So generally speaking, and when I say wine casks, we're not talking sherry, we're talking, Burgundy casks, Bordeaux casks, American Cabernet Sauvignon casks, lots of these different types of oak that are used to mature whiskey because there's a shortage of those classic sherry casks. Sometimes they work well, a lot of times they don't. So I'm kind of middle of the road on them. Sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. I have some staff who love them almost all the time, and then I've got one staff person in particular who hates them almost all the time. But this one here got past both Sean and I, two members of the Kensington Wine Market team who are not generally really excited about wine cask matured whiskeys, but this one we felt was suitably interesting for us to put our name on it and put it out there into the world. So, as I said before, what have we got here? 2010, 12 years old, finished in a Santo cask, originally matured in a hogshead, so probably a refill hogshead cask, wasn't very active, 54.9%. I mean, in terms of size here, this was 314 bottles. The Santo cask was almost certainly a hogshead as well too, 250 liter cask to get that sort of outturn. And I think I mentioned it, but in case I didn't, 54.9%. So we'll give that a nose. Mine's in the glass there. Okay, to swirl it around a little bit. One of the things that immediately leaps out at me on the nose is that meaty, slightly sulfury style. Now, this is not a flaw in the case of this whiskey. Sulfur can be a flaw in that you get a sulfur stick burned in the candle, a sulfur candle burned in the cask to purify it before it's shipped, but almost always those candles will leave a taint. Now, if you send the cask wet filled with about, I think it's 10 to 20 liters of liquid in it, you don't need to do that. But if you're a sherry producer or a winemaker, chances are you probably want most of your wine. You don't want to send it wet. And that's where that sulfur taint or flaw can come in. But this is not that. What do I get? A nice creamy nose to it. I get a note that I love, and it's not something you come across very often, but milk chocolate jujubes is sort of where my mind is going to right now. So jujubes dipped in milk chocolate. Fruit by the foot, which is not something I have very often, but kind of taking me back to my childhood. And some candied nuts in there too. Maybe beer nuts, honey roasted almonds. Some nice citrus tones like orange and lemon juice in there too. Let's give it a taste, shall we? It's thick, rich, mouth coating, very honeyed, warm spices, those candied nuts coming through into the finish. It's got quite a big delivery to it, an impressively big delivery to it. Really rich, fruity. There's some leathery, earthy tones coming through in there too. It reminds me, it's got a slightly oxidative note to it, so something that you might see in like a Fino sherry or maybe some older white wines. Not surprising that we're getting something like that, given that this is a cask that has been seasoned with a sweet wine. Going back to it once again, kind of more wine gums now. It's a little bit tart, a little bit sour, kind of like a bitter orange tone coming through, or those aromatic bitters that you put into a cocktail. It's spicy, it's toasty, and then I'm getting kind of a green, grassy, malty tone to it, which not entirely surprising. This is a 12-year-old whiskey. You'd think you might get a little touch of that. So I'm gonna add a drop of water to it. I know I don't do this all the time, but I will do that. The finish on this, I find more of those like jujube, wine gum notes, some spices, and a soft leather. Medium long in length, but let's see what adding a drop of water does to the equation here. Takes away a bit of that meatiness from the nose, so if you don't like that, this is kind of taking it more into the honeyed fruits, candied fruits, artificial fruit sort of notes. On the palate with water. Hasn't changed too much. That meatiness is still there. Loads of honey, lots of fruits, melons, apricots, jujubes, wine gums, all those notes are there. It's taken away a bit of that bitterness, like that bitter orange note is gone. Those sort of aromatic bitters are toned down a little bit. I think I might like this better with a drop of water in it, which I almost never say. I will often admit that some whiskeys take it well. This one I think takes it quite well. Makes it a bit more fresh, a bit more lively. One last sip. Yeah, this is a nice dram. Someone who might like, say, a refill sherry profile in a single malt, you're getting something similar to that here. A little bit of leather, tobacco, and spices, but really there's that creamy base from that original maturation, and then on top of that you've got fruits both bright and tart, and yeah, it's a fresh young single malt. I hope you like it. I hope you enjoyed this little tasting. If you have just stumbled onto this tasting on our YouTube page, you can buy bottles of this whiskey at kensingtonwinemarket.com. You can also buy samples of this whiskey and others which are accompanied by short YouTube tastings such as this. So until next time, everyone, be well. Slange.